Hello, everybody. Again, we're at the 2014 Chicago Vintage and Custom Drum Show, and I'm happy to be doing interviews right here at the REBEATS Cafe. And we've got with us today author, drummer, and educator Daniel Glass. How you doing, my friend?
Great.
So good to see you. I've seen so much of your work. I've been wanting to talk to you, and now it's finally coming to fruition. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say, because you really are right up my alley with all the vintage stuff you do, and your drumming chops, love it. What's going on in the world of Daniel Glass?
Too much, as usual.
Too much.
Yeah.
Too much on your plate, but you're handling it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I take each of those labels, drummer, author, educator, seriously, and I have wide-ranging interests, and so I kind of go like that in 10 different directions all at once. But I enjoy it. So I'm a professional drummer, been for many years. The band I was most closely associated with is Royal Crown Review. I was with that band for about 20 years, and we were real dedicated to classic American music styles, a variety of different music styles, and the band was all about that stuff. And so through that, I became interested in vintage drums and all these traditional styles of drumming. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that there was nobody out there talking about that stuff in any real way, both in terms of, there was certainly this vintage drumming community, but there really wasn't anybody talking about how the vintage drums were used and how drummers played them, you know. There were books about, with lists of famous drummers, but there wasn't really any overriding thing that talked about the era, from the beginning of the drum set and how drummers played the kit and what was happening in the world and how that affected their ability to play and what gear when did the hi-hat show up? When did the tom-tom show up? And there was no information really about this stuff. So
how long ago was this?
I joined Royal Crown Review 20 years ago, 1994, and we were on Warner Brothers. We sort of introduced the swing music back to the world again, so there was a whole retro swing phenomenon in the 90s.
Yes.
So I was really busy with that, and when we were touring, I had the opportunity to collect vintage drums all over the country. Everywhere we went, I'd go to pawn shops and music stores and dig around.
Great opportunities, huh?
That's really where I got most of my collection. It was good because in the early and mid 90s, a lot of this stuff you could still find at thrift shops, and it wasn't as much of a collecting, feeding frenzy as it is today.
And things have changed from that era.
Well, there was no internet to compete. No eBay.
Yeah.
So, we were into not only gear, because all the guys in the band, the guitar players, the sax players, they all collected vintage stuff. They collected vintage. I have the most amazing collection of vintage ties, hundreds of vintage ties, vintage tie bars, cufflinks, suits, from all the eras.
So you were living the whole thing,
We were living the whole thing.
Not just collecting
right.
Wearing the vintage clothing.
Drums was obviously a big part of that, and I was using drums in the show, because that's what we were about. And so what ended up happening was, in learning to play these styles, I realized there wasn't any instructional materials out there, so the thing I started to do was interview the guys who had played on these records. And I went and sought these guys out wherever we were on the road. So I was in Nashville, Memphis, New York, Chicago, Texas, of course, all over Southern California, Florida, Seattle, Portland, Chicago. Everywhere I went, I would unearth the guys that had played on the Chess records and the Sun records and Motown records, and I just started interviewing all these legendary guys. And what was cool is no one was really had interviewed them. Not many people had. They sort of were like, someone's interested in me, and I was going, are you kidding? You made you played on blue suede shoes. You played on Folsom Prison Blues. I mean, you played on.
Isn't that
a whole lot of shaking going on, and nobody cared. It seemed like.
Yeah.
So what I did was I started interviewing, and also guys going farther back. So Earl Palmer became a good friend. Buddy Harmon in Nashville became a good friend. I stayed at his house. They would give me stuff. They would share their time with me, photographs, let me scan their photos, and I just became friends. And then they all started dying because they're all old, and I realized if we don't do something to document these stories, we're going to lose our one direct connection with the music that is all around us. So if you think of classic swing, classic blues, early rock and roll, rockabilly, rhythm and blues, everything leading up to like the British invasion, we had, as drummers, I felt like I had a responsibility to document this stuff and to share this stuff with the world. And not only that, but also this was a really incredible story. It was an incredible these guys had done incredible things, you know. So to date now, I've published 5 books. I've made 2 DVDs, some of which I've got here. I can talk
good.
to you
We'd
about.
like to see those. Sure.
And my newest book actually is one I just did with Steve Smith. Came out last September. It's called The Roots of Rock Drumming, and I've sold out of that one so far at the show. Sold out yesterday already.
So we don't have one to show over here.
We don't have one to show, unfortunately. I actually went and looked to see if Rob Cook had one, and he sold out too. But that's interviews with all these guys that were in the 50s and 60s that started rock. And some of them were swing guys, some were blues guys, some were jazz guys, some were country guys. But they all contributed something to the brew that was early rock and roll, you know. So my own story is just that around 1999 is when I started doing interviews, and I've been doing it, so I guess about 15 years now. And what my goal is to share with people. In about 2002, I started doing clinics, and the idea was to take the material I've been learning from these interviews and what I'd done in my band and present that. And what I figured out was different ways that you could help drummers of today, not only young drummers, but baby boom drummers who maybe their knowledge doesn't go back past Gene Krupa or Ringo Starr.
Yeah,
you know,
I find
65,
that to be true
the
also.
Beatles.
Yes.
No, people don't know anything earlier than that. So the idea was to say, look, what we do today, even if you don't play any of these styles of music or know anything about these people, this can be of value to you. If you're a death metal drummer, here's how. If you're a funk drummer, here's how. If you're a rock drummer, hip hop drummer, you know, I'm a younger guy. I mean, I'm 48 years old, but I grew up in the rock world, and I never wanted to be one of these guys that looked down my nose and said, well, people today, that you guys just don't know, you're not cool, you don't understand, this is the real deal. I want to say, if this is what you do, here's how I could show you what, by learning about your past, will make you better at what you do. So to try to give people some very practical reasons why learning about and understanding about their evolution, their history, their past will make them a better and more successful and more profitable drummer today in 2014.
I see the similarity in our missions together here, to tell you the truth, because at Vintage Drum Stock I've always done kind of the same thing, but you're doing it with the players, you know, emphasis on the players and the playing styles, whereas basically I'm talking about the collectors and the instruments themselves, and elevating these collectors and giving them their due for taking the time to take these instruments and these pieces of history and preserving them. Whereas you're doing that also, and the history behind it, and you're taking it a step further by playing those styles yourself and demonstrating them, right?
Well, because that's what I did as a drummer. So it kind of all worked out together. I had the drums, I had the experience of doing it, and then I had the desire to go out and research more about it. So the Century Project, which is this DVD I put out 2 years ago, this is a kind of I don't know if you want to get a shot of it, but it's a culmination of 12 years essentially at the time of playing and research and evolution and history. And the idea was to show how the drum set evolved in relation to how history was evolving in America. Because the drum set is an American instrument. People may not realize that.
Right.
It started and was created in America, and it evolved in an amazing way. If you think about a piano or a guitar, those instruments came over from Europe and already were fully developed. And maybe the way we played them changed, or we added electric versions of them. Mm-hmm. But the drum set started as a kick drum and a snare drum that were used in a marching situation. Originally, they were played without a pedal, with sticks. Guys doing what's called double drumming, playing a snare and a bass together with just sticks.
Yeah.
And it went from there, you know, and how that story of how the music evolved and how it changed and how we played it and when the hi-hat came in and when the ride cymbal came in. And it's a fascinating story. It's a journey.
Yeah.
So what I endeavored to do in the Century Project was to tell that story in a way that's fun, exciting, interesting, and doesn't alienate people. Rather, it invites them into my world.
What I've seen, especially about this Century Project, is really interesting, you guys. It's a well-produced piece, but he'll talk about, you know, the hi-hat development of the low boy or whatever, Duncan Sackville, and then play it. He'll talk about maybe Chinese toms or that era with the trap table and all that kind of thing, to show how those pieces came from the theater, from leaning a snare drum up against the chair, to some guy, you know, well, how am I going to play the bass drum and the snare? Oh, now something else gets developed. Now we've got a set, the beginnings of a set, toms, and you actually play that style on that set. That's what I like about this project.
Having worked with all the best players in the country, really, both on the East Coast and the West Coast, who specialize, say, in ragtime or early jazz or 20s jazz or big band swing or rhythm and blues or rockabilly or early rock and roll. Most of my guys are in LA, and most of my gear was in LA, so I shot this at Drum Channel, which is in LA, and partnered with them on the project. And the idea was to bring in the authentic players, the authentic gear, and to do it sort of as a lecture, but then cut away to these performances that would sort of put you into the era. So when I'm doing the basic lecturing, I'm kind of dressed modern, and I'm talking to an audience, but then we cut away, and it's sort of like you take a step back into the past and really see how it all worked together. And I think, that's one of the things that's made it successful, is that it really offers a broad variety. The other thing I want to get to is this other DVD, Traps, is a companion piece to the Century Project, because we use 11 vintage drums sets in the Century Project. And I'm dealing so much with the history and the story and the performances that it was like I didn't have a chance to talk about the gear. So I happened to start shooting these right around the time of the NAMM show out in LA. And John Aldridge, a friend of mine who's one of the gurus of vintage drums, of course, who I'd known through this scene, was there. And I said, hey man, why don't you come out and help me set up the vintage drum sets? And maybe we'll sit down and we'll talk about them a little bit, and we'll make a 30-minute special feature and attach that to the Century Project.
You know what this reminds me of? Especially that section with John Aldridge. It takes me back. Now, some of you younger guys are not going to remember this, but Rob Cook, who runs this whole show, he is very responsible, along with John Aldridge in that era, of creating this vintage drum community. Yeah. But the particular sequence you do with John Aldridge sitting there talking about particular drums, well, Rob Cook did the same thing early on with VHS tapes, and it was very early on in the drum community, but I still watch that to this day, the row of Black Beauties and John picking them up, and this is before any internet or any
back
books.
In the 80s.
That was great. And this sequence that you do in this reminds me of that. There you're sitting with the same guy, only it's a long time later, and we've got all this technology.
Well, I couldn't have done any of this without Rob and John and being tied into this incredible community, because I've learned so much. And in my early days of collecting, those were my go-to guys, were Rob and John. And so, to have the opportunity, I mean, I've been lucky because, in a way, my profile, I've been able to, through my clinics and stuff, been able to take this kind of vintage vibe and take it to the mainstream drumming community. So my goal was to create something I could introduce to people, not so much on this scene that already know a lot about this stuff, but to people that know nothing about this stuff.
That's the thing. It's getting to those younger people that will talk about a Lars Ulrich snare
who may
or
not know about the Chicago show,
right?
But they've seen me at a mainstream drum festival, where I have a chance to kind of open hearts and minds, or at a clinic somewhere.
And you're seeing it happen, right?
Oh yeah,
just today.
It's happened amazingly in the last few years.
22-year-old kid could just come up to me, hey, I've seen your videos and what you do, and thank you. And I'm like, you watch, and he's really paying attention. So I'm glad that people like yourself and myself that are promoting the vintage aspect of drums are reaching younger people that are going to hopefully hang on to that and respect these instruments the way we do. Yeah. Somebody's got to keep it going. We don't want those to go to the wayside. So you are certainly carrying that on with these projects that you're doing.
Yeah, so with John, we sat down, and I thought we're just going to cover a few things. And lo and behold, once we got through 11 drum sets, we've been talking for 6.5 hours. So we had to cut 6.5 hours of footage down to 4 hours. So this DVD is 3 hours, this DVD is 4 hours. And the two work really well together because it's different material. This really focuses on the gear, this focuses on the playing and the performance. But Traps, they're really, other than Rob's thing, which never got transferred to DVD, there wasn't really anything out there in visual form that gave people an overall introduction to vintage drums. So this is pretty in-depth, though. I mean, we get into every aspect of vintage drums you can imagine, from the drums and cymbals to finishes, badges. I mean, hoops, snare beds, snare wires, throw-offs, cymbals, all kinds of hardware. I mean, everything you can possibly imagine. And we take those 11 drum sets and just dissect them down to the nuts and bolts. And what's so great is I know a certain amount about vintage, but nothing like what John knows. I'm a player. John is the guy about the gear, you know. So I knew enough that we could have an educated discussion, but he really takes off. And then we were able to take the 11 drum sets. We spent a whole day in LA. Basically, I had a small team of people come in, clean up the gear. 8 of the 11 kits that we use are from my collection, and I borrowed a few more key pieces. clean everything up, and then we spent 2 days putting the drum sets on a revolving platform.
I saw the platform.
And we
I was
shoot
very
the platform
impressed.
from the front and above and lit it really beautifully. So the drum sets are displayed almost like in museum quality, or like you're at a new car show and the new 2014 things going around on the platform.
I'm telling you, it looks great. I think
So,
some of these
you know-
are on YouTube, aren't they? Little excerpts?
Yeah, little snippets.
If you can find it, but pick this up. It's great that the revolving stage works beautifully for this application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, maybe you could put a link to my website or
Sure,
something, DanielGlass.com. People
sure.
can watch the trailers for these
Absolutely.
on the website.
We'll put that up.
And for those of you who are here at the show, I'm over at the Crescent booth right inside here, and I've got copies of these if you're interested in picking them up. And the one other thing I wanted to talk about, which is a new addition, is that I did a poster with Vic Firth, which maybe I can send you a PDF and you can put the whole thing up. But
Sure.
it's similar to the Century Project in that it takes you on a walk through the history of the drum set from
Wow,
1865
look at
to
that.
1965. So we have 16 different dates on here, and each one focuses on a particular element of drum history or drum evolution. What's cool is there's an interactive website and timeline here at the bottom. So if you go to that link, and I'm sure you can flash that on the screen.
Sure.
Basically, if you click on any one of the dates on the timeline, it opens up a short video that I
Oh.
did. We shot 16 videos with Vic, and to demonstrate each one of these events. So the idea behind this poster is to send it out to thousands of educators, schools, band rooms, drum shops, and so there's a visual on the wall, and somebody just looking at this can go, wow, this is kind of a cool story. And then if they want more, they can go to the Century Project. They can learn more. It's real interactive, and my goal is to just make it so that, if, for example, if you're interested in the drums, you have a lot of different options. You could study rock, you could study funk, you could study hip hop, you could study blues, right? What I want is that the study of our tradition and our instrument and ways to play in traditional ways become as mainstream and easy for people to access and study as rock or funk or jazz or any of these other styles, that it just becomes something that's there. And part of my mission has been to populate this niche with products. So if people are more interested in, say, the blues, they can go to this book, or hit the drums themselves, they can go to this book. So, it gives people a window into that past, and a friendly one that then invites them in.
Well, I think this is being done professionally. I mean, if you could see these products, guys, he's really done it up right and spared no expense. I can see here. This is
Spared no
just
expense,
great.
so please
Yeah.
buy one so I can get gas
Yeah.
money to drive home after this show.
Oh, look at this! I see Zorro and Daniel Glass.
Yeah, I've been able to collaborate on a project with Zorro. This book, it's all about the history of, it's basically the Bible of shuffle playing. It's about rhythm and blues and how shuffles essentially, when they came out of the big band era, how that led to rock and roll and funk and hip hop and all these other styles. I do a whole clinic about shuffles, actually, and people are amazed. People are amazed to learn that shuffles are at the heart of reggae drumming. They're at the heart of hip hop, at the heart of gospel, funk, rock, country. Shuffles are so important. Sorry, the paper there. Shuffles are so important in our development and evolution as drummers, and yet most people can play maybe one shuffle if they're lucky, and they think it's just for blues drummers.
Right.
So this is like a real in-depth book. Took me 8 years to write and work on it with Zorro, where we really try to, again, bring that history to people, show them 100 different shuffle grooves they can play, because the shuffle's one of the most diverse grooves that you can play. And there's a CD in here that has 11, in addition to all the transcriptions, there's 11 mini songs that have drums, and then there's no drums on there, and people can play along and learn just a scratch about how the different shuffles operate and how they worked in the 40s and 50s, really.
How long has this been available?
This came out in 2009. It won the Drummy, the Book of the Year in Drum. Century Project won the DVD of the Year in Drum and Modern Drummer. So these have done well, and it's just it's hard because we live in a world today where people don't buy books and DVDs and CDs the way they used to. So
online.
But we're out here hustling, and my goal is to try, if I can, and this is obviously from a businessman's perspective, you want your stuff to sell, but to try to get the Century Project to be something that is in every band room, in every teacher's private teacher's collection, that educators use to continue. It's just a great, if you're a drummer, it just gives you a nice overall place from where to start, to say, here's the history of your instrument. Now, whatever you play, go from there, and you
Terrific.
understand where it comes from.
Now, what kind of feedback are you actually getting from, let's say, younger people? I think you're really trying to target younger people. Are you hearing back? What are you hearing back from that?
Tremendous feedback.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, when I first started doing these clinics, there was a lot of naysayers, and people said, no one's interested in history, no one's going to buy any of this, no one, blah, blah, blah. And it sort of gave me the fire to push forward with what I was doing. And one of the things I really learned before I shot the Century Project, I'd been doing clinics for about 8 years. And a lot of this material was presented in the clinics, and I'd learned what was a successful way to reach an audience and what was going to work. And so one of the things, for example, that I did was, Vic Firth, say, would send a box of sticks and other swag. So I'd say, well, for a pair of sticks, who can tell me, when the bass drum pedal first came around? And by the time you ask a few of those questions, the audience is having a great time with you, and you're talking and laughing and joking with them.
And you've got some interaction going.
And
That's
they're
terrific.
excited and they're participating. So what I did in the DVD to imitate that was that we had a live audience in the shoot. Before we started the shoot that day, we sat maybe 10 or 12 people down in front of a green screen, and we gave them a list of 10 questions and just had them answer the questions. And then in the course of my lecture on the DVD, I asked those 10 questions.
Yeah.
We stopped the tape. People, we had a discussion, but then we came back. So when we edited it, we took all the green screen responses and edited each question together like a little short movie that's like 20 seconds long. And it's a little flow of people answering the questions. So you, the viewer at home, can stop and listen to how they're doing it and laugh, because some of the responses are funny, some are silly, some are great, some are, it's real nice.
Now it's entertaining then.
It's entertaining.
Yes.
So, but you, the viewer, can think about this for a minute before we get back to the presentation. And I've found that it's very interactive. It allows the viewer to participate instead of this just being, like a lecture coming at you the whole way. You stop and you go, well, now what about that? Oh, I like that guy's answer, but what about this guy's answer? And it worked. So these are some of the things that I was able to integrate into the Century Project to really, I thought it through a lot, before we shot of one frame. And there was about a year of planning that went into it before we shot anything. And it was shot over three periods of time.
So
it's a real, this is kind of the flagship for everything I do, because this is really my time period, is the century, 1865 to 1965. That's really, I love drumming of all eras. I'm into modern stuff today. I write pop songs. But, for what I do, this sort of is the umbrella product. And then everything else kind of is more taking one era, say, and building it out. This is the rhythm and blues era, So it's really been a lot of fun, and it's great. I've gotten tremendous feedback at the show. I met a guy today from Liverpool, comes up to me. I just watched this 2 weeks ago. It's changed my life,
Yeah.
And then, Jason Sutter, who's a very famous drummer, plays with Marilyn Manson.
Right.
He came up to me yesterday, and Jojo Mayer is here, and Jojo and I have had long conversations about this, and Stanton Moore has been a friend for a long time, and both of us are into the education thing. So, it's one of the nice things I'm seeing, particularly in the last maybe 10 years. And I think a lot of it started with Zorro, who did a great job of taking funk and soul and hip hop and making them really, getting people excited about studying about them. Is that there's a new kind of crew of educators in the drum world who are players, but who are very, very serious about helping us to explore our past, The 20th century was a time of incredible music, and so much great stuff was done, and the people that invented that are now leaving us, and it's up to us to document this stuff and document it effectively. And the 21st century, there's a lot more electronics, it's a new, different world, and this stuff has to be maintained, kept, loved, represented, and documented.
And there's the connection.
And the gear does too.
That
the
is
gear
the
is
connection
important.
here.
So
we've got both things happening right here with someone like Daniel Glass, who's really, I'm going to say, putting his money where his mouth is too with this stuff. This is not cheap to do, but you can hear the passion coming here, and he's just as passionate as I am about presenting history, making it continue on, educating young people, although he's really delving forward. He's playing that stuff and making sure they understand it. Plus, he's explaining the history, as we do here. We have a little fun with, the collection aspect of it. The history goes along with it, but it's all about education.
The drums, the drums tell stories. And for me, as someone who plays the music, it's been really interesting, because when you actually take a drum set, say from the mid-1930s, and you play mid-1930s swing on that drum set, the way things were set up, the way the gear could be utilized, the way it sounded, calfskin heads, you know, the way the bearing edges were cut, the way you had to place the toms way out here. You know, it determines how you play the music, and you understand why those guys played the way that they did. They had limitations because they didn't have a ride cymbal. They couldn't tilt the cymbals. There was no cymbal tilter. You know, they had to play on a hi-hat that they couldn't lift or drop. So a lot of times, guys actually played. Well, let's see here. If this is the normal way we play, hi-hat here, hand on top. You see Buddy Rich doing this. He's playing traditional grip with the snare hand on top because the hi-hat was so low. They had to play this way. Totally awkward. And then you appreciate even more someone like a Buddy or you know, a Gene or you know, a Sonny Payne, who were so amazing, and the limited gear they had to do that on, the limited recording techniques to capture what they were doing, you respect them that much more because, you know, they were sitting on a trap case with a coat on it, or a chair with a cardboard box on, or a crate on it that you couldn't adjust. You know, the adjusting you could do was so minimal. So it's blown my mind, you know, learning about this stuff. And you'll look at a picture that maybe you've seen a million times, and then you realize, hey, wait a minute, he doesn't have a regular cymbal stand. He's got a cymbal stand that he took a blowtorch to and bent.
And did it himself.
So that he could tilt that cymbal. And you looked at the picture for 10 years and never saw that. So that's what I try to do, is look at photos and see something that really no one has seen, you know, before or has sort of forgotten about, and to bring those gems to life. So these two DVDs have 600 old catalog photos. They've got, you know, old 8x10s, tons and tons of 8x10s, still frames, little video clips. I've got a video clip on traps of William F. Ludwig II demonstrating a sound of a shot that they would use for the old silent movies.
Yeah, he used to do it.
And you know, Ludwig made a thing, and Rob Cook actually shot a video. So he would hit it with a hammer, bam. And you know, this stuff comes to life. Last year here at the show, I did a round table where William F. Ludwig III, B3, was there. He brought a box of his grandfather's traps. The original William F. Ludwig, who was one of the great trap drummers here in Chicago in the 20s.
Which are highly collectible now, those Ludwig sound effects.
Yep, and he did a whole demonstration of what, like a Western movie, what that would sound like. And by the way, on the poster, 1927, I believe is the date, we talk about trap drumming, and there's a video of William F. Ludwig III doing that. So you can find that on the internet if you go to this website here, which you can flash again.
We want to certainly make sure that you get into traps here. This is going to be around for a long time, just like
we
some
got a lot of
books.
copies over at the Crescent booth.
That's right. And if you're here today, go and get those, because I'm going to pick one up myself, even though I've seen excerpts. But you have sold me, my friend. I'll tell you, you are just a passionate person.
Can I mention one more thing?
You may.
For those of you who are coming to Chicago next year, 2015, I've got a really special presentation cooked up. So for those of you here and those of you who might see this online, next year is the 25th anniversary of the Chicago show, so it's a big year. They're going to do 3 days of the show instead of 2.
Don't miss it.
And it's also, 2015 is the 80th year since Benny Goodman's orchestra first blew up and at the Palomar Ballroom in California, and essentially launched the big band swing era of the 30s and 40s. So it was 1935. So it's 80 years since then. So what I'm going to do is, with my academic friend Theodore Dennis Brown, who wrote that doctoral dissertation, we're going to do a tribute to Sing Sing Sing, and we're going to take the song apart, we're going to take the groove apart, we're going to talk about the history and evolution of the groove, of Krupa, of the Goodman Band, of the swing period. I'm going to demonstrate his technique and the way he did it, and we're going to have a live performance of the song. So that's going to actually be on the main stage, and it'll be a whole really just like digging in and giving tribute and showing also the legacy of Krupa, because people don't realize, like, the status of the drummer today in the band is, we still owe Gene Krupa. He was the first guy to bring that on and to really make that bring the status of the drummer to a whole new level.
It's amazing when you bring that up, because Krupa had his own thing going, yet the drummers at the time would say, well, he wasn't the most technical drummer, yet he brought the whole image of the drummer, like you say, forward, which prior to that they were just timekeepers in the background.
You're right.
And he brought this whole persona along with himself and created a whole new era.
And actually, in the
drummer.
Century Project, when I talk about Krupa, the thing about Krupa is that from 1935, when the Benny Goodman Band broke, until 1965 when Ringo Starr exploded with the Beatles. He was the most popular drummer in the world, hands down, by far and away. If you look at the Slingerland catalogs, he was on the cover of every single one.
Oh, yeah.
And I show them
Oh, yeah.
all in Century Project. I also, when you talk about Sing 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 and how important that was, I scroll a list of all the big band tunes from the 1930s that start with a big drum intro. Every band had to have one of those tunes after Sing 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 was important. And not only did that elevate the status of the drummer, it elevated the status of the tom-tom, because Krupa was instrumental with Slingerland in creating double-headed tom-toms, where you could tune each head individually. That was not a standard part of the kit prior to Krupa. But once you had the big bands and drummers could play out a little, they needed to be able to have bigger toms to do that. So once you do that, the floor tom now is a standard part of a kit.
Trap tables
and the way
are
that
gone.
drummers use them, you could trap tables go away, and you can use the floor tom now as a real timekeeping device. They had used toms before, Duke Ellington and stuff in the 20s, Cotton Club, but it was more of a sound effect. Now the floor tom and the toms, you could play grooves on them. So how many songs in the history of drumming since then have utilized the toms as an important part of the groove? That you could date it back to Sing Sing Sing. So we could go on all day, and I will.
telling you, and
if
I
you come over to the
almost
booth,
would.
I'll wrap your ear
If
off.
we
about
had
it,
enough
but-
time, but I'll tell you, folks, Daniel Glass has been a real motivator for a lot of people with these works that he's done here. The Century Project, if you haven't seen it yet, you gotta pick it up, and you're gonna know what Daniel Glass is all about. Jim Messina here, right at the 2014 Custom and Vintage Drum Show, right here coming from the REBEATS Cafe this year with Daniel Glass, my friend.
Thank you.
You are a phenomenon, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Check out Daniel Glass and all his stuff. All right. Take care, folks. How you doing, stranger? Chip Ritter, folks.
Swing drummers in the
A
country.
little cameo going on here.
Chip Ritter, ladies and gentlemen.
Daniel
Yeah.
Glass,
Did a
one of
clinic
my
this morning.
heroes.
Thanks, Chip.
awesome.
God,
See you
we'll
later.
talk.